live teaching learning session of Principles of Macroeconomics BECC 134. Today's topic is inflation and its types. What is inflation and what are the various types of inflation? Under this topic, we will study about meaning of inflation, what is price index or GDP deflator. It is also known as GDP deflator or price index. And what are the various types of inflation and the distinguish between demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. In today's class, we will discuss about all these topics. First of all, what is the meaning of inflation? Inflation means continuous or persistent rise in price level. The increase in the amount of money necessary to obtain the same amount of product or service before the inflated price was present. Social phenomena where too much money chased too few goods or services, its harmful impact because the purchasing power of the currency changes downward in value. According to Irving Fisher, inflation occurs when money supply increases. He said that whenever money supply rises, price level also rises by the same ratio and simultaneously. In other words, if money supply doubles, then price level will also be double. If money supply will be half, then price level will be half. It means there is a positive and direct or proportionate relationship between money supply and price level. It means inflation occurs only due to increase in money supply, not in any other factors. But price increases not only by increase in money supply, it increases by other so many factors are responsible to increase the price level. So inflation means the continuous or persistent rise in general price level for the long time period. That will be called inflation. Meaning of inflation. In economics, inflation is a rise in the general price level of all the goods and services which are produced in an economy over a period of time. When the general price level rises, each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services. It's a simple phenomena. When price level increases, then our purchasing power will fall because our income is called nominal income, which is received by us in form of wages and salaries. Real income is calculated by dividing nominal income to price level. If price level increases, then real income will be fall. And when price level falls, real income or purchasing power will rise. So there is an inverse relationship between price level and the value of money. When price level increases, the value of money falls. And when price level falls, value of money increases. This relationship was propounded by Irving Fisher in the theory of quantity theory of money. So inflation mainly occur due to increase in price level or increase in money supply. In this case, price level of all the goods and services will rise and the purchasing power of the currency will fall and the value of money will also falls. This is called inflation. Next is according to Crowther, the definition of inflation is the state or a position or a condition in which the value of money is falling and the price level is increasing. When the price is increasing and the value of money is falling, that is called inflation according to C. Crowther. In economics, the word inflation refers to general rise in prices measured against a standard level of purchasing power. As well as inflation increases, value of money start falling. It means there is an inverse relationship between inflation and value of money or purchasing power of the currency. And money supply and price level are directly or positively or proportionately related with each other. So inflation in economics refers to the increase in general price level of all the goods and services. Now next is features of inflation. What are the various features of inflation? Inflation involves a process of the persistent or continuous rise in prices. It involves rising trend in price level. In India, except first 5-year plan which was made in 1951 to 56, except that plan, after that this plan 1956 onwards in India, inflation is existing or inflation is continuously exist in the economy. It means in India here price is increasing due to so many factors, so many reasons behind this. Price increases due to increase in money supply. Price also can increase due to shortage of agriculture production. Price can also increase due to lack of industrial production. Price can also increase due to change in government policies. If government impose more taxes on producers and provide less subsidies, then price level will increase and inflation occurs. Price can also increase due to increase in oil prices. As you know that regularly petroleum product prices are increasing. When petroleum product price increases, transportation cost also increases. And due to increase in transportation cost, all goods and services which are produced in the economy, their price goes up. So inflation occurs due to increase in oil prices. Inflation occurs due to war period. When an economy is suffering from war period, then consumer goods product will become less and capital goods production will rise. In that case, demand increases but supply can't increase. In this case, inflation occurs. So inflation is the continuous and persistent rise in price level. Next is inflation feature is it is a state of disequilibrium. Because if aggregate demand and aggregate supply both are equal, then inflation will not occur. Inflation only occurs in that situation when demand is more than supply. So if there is a disequilibrium, then inflation occurs. On the other hand, if aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply, then deflation situation will occur in the economy. So economy is a dynamic and it can't be said that Aggregate demand will remain always equals to aggregate supply. It may be in a disequilibrium position, or AD may be greater than AS, or AD may be less than AS. If aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply, then inflation occurs, and if aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply, then deflation situation will occur. So it is a state of disequilibrium. Next is, it is a scarcity oriented. Scarcity is called shortage or limitation or lack of anything. So if there is a scarcity occur in the economy, like if supply is less and demand is more, then inflation definitely exists in the economy. Next is, inflation is a dynamic in nature. It means sometimes price increases by more ratio and sometimes price increases by less proportion. So price may be increased in more rate or in a less rate. Inflation rate may be higher, may be lower. So it is a dynamic in nature. Next is, inflationary price rise is persistent and irreversible. When price increases, then it can't be decreased. It only decrease in that situation when supply of that product increases and demand falls. Otherwise, price if price increases, that will not decrease. For example, the price of milk is increasing in India every time, and price is not falling of milk. When price increases, it will not fall. It means price is persistent, rise in price is continuous or persistent and irreversible. We can't change the price of the milk. We can't decrease the price of the milk when inflation exists. Inflation is caused by excess demand in relation to supply of all types of goods and services. Generally, inflation occurs in that time when demand is more and supply is less. This situation is also known as excess demand situation. Excess demand situation always occurs inflationary gap situation. So inflationary gap exists when aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply at the level of full employment. Inflation is purely a monetary phenomena because it is related with money supply. When RBI issues more paper currency, coins, notes, etc., then supply of money increases, or circulation of money or flow of money increases in the economy. When the circulation of money increases, then purchasing power of the country people will also rise. If purchasing power rises, then their capacity to demand will also rise. And when demand rises, but we know that there is a scarcity of all the factors of production like land, labor, capital, entrepreneur, all the factors of productions are available in each and every country or economy in a limited quantity. So supply can't increase according to the increase in demand. In that case, when supply can't increase, only demand increases due to increase in circulation of money or flow of money or increase in money supply. In that case, only aggregate demand will rise, supply will not rise. And it will create the situation of inflation or excess demand. So, inflation is totally a monetary phenomenon. Inflation generally occurs at the level of full employment. When full employment exists in the economy, what is full employment? Full employment is a situation where all the country people gets job opportunities. It means there is no involuntary unemployment exists at the level of full employment. According to classical economics, full employment is a simple phenomena and it can be achieved very easily because they assume the time period of long run. But according to Keynes, full employment is not a very simple or general phenomena which can be achieved very easily. At the level of full employment, 5% to 6% unemployment may also exist because people may be voluntarily unemployed. You can't force them to work. So full employment can't be exist in each and every economy at present. So full employment is not a general or simple phenomena which can be achieved very easily. But inflation situation will always occur when there is a full employment situation exist in the economy. So inflation is a post full employment phenomena, not before. It's not a pre full employment phenomena, it's a post full employment phenomena. It means after achieving the full employment level, no one any other thing will increase, like production will not increase. If you have achieved full employment, output will not increase, income will not increase, employment will not increase, only price level will increase. So inflation is a phenomena of post full employment. And inflation is also a very long term process because inflation is said that when continuous rise in price level or persistent rise in price level for the long time period, that situation is called inflation. So these are the features of inflation. These are very important because inflation, you can understand with the help of these features what is inflation and what are the main properties or characteristics of inflation. So inflation is, in short, we can say that inflation is a totally monetary phenomena. Inflation occurs after achieving the full employment level, not before that. Inflation is a dynamic situation or dynamic in nature. Inflation is a state of disequilibrium position because if there is an equilibrium when AD is equals to AS, then no level of price will increase. But if there is a disequilibrium situation, it may be either AD greater than AS or less than AS. If AD is greater than AS, then inflation occurs. If AD is less than AS, then deflation situation will occur. So these are the features of inflation. Next is inflation. The types of inflation are so many types. Inflation we can divide it into two parts. One is inflation rate and other is causes of inflation. The rate of inflation may be moderate. Inflation rate may be galloping. Inflation rate may be hyperinflation, and causes of inflation or types of inflation may be two types. One is demand pull inflation. And second is cost push inflation. These are known as cause of inflation. Why this is called the cause of inflation? It means if demand increases and supply remains constant, then inflation will occur. This situation is exist in the economy when aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. So this is also known as the cause of inflation. Here price is increasing due to increase in demand. That's why it is known as cause of inflation. And the other cause is cost push inflation. If an economy increase in cost of production will also push the price level higher. So this is also the cause of inflation, demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. But moderate inflation galloping inflation, hyperinflation is known as inflation rate. So these are the difference between rate and cause of inflation. Inflation rate may be of three types: moderate, galloping, and hyper. And cause of inflation may be of two types. One is demand pull inflation, and other is cost push inflation. Next is kinds of inflation. Kinds of inflation is also known as types of inflation, or various types of inflations are: number one is creeping inflation, second is walking inflation, third is running or galloping inflation, and fourth is hyperinflation. These are also known as inflation rate. We can describe these all kinds of inflation with the help of inflation rate. First is creeping inflation. What is creeping inflation? When inflation rate increases by 2 to 3%, or it is also known as very mild inflation, because in this case inflation rate is increasing at a very slow rate. When inflation exists at the rate of 2% to 3%, that is known as creeping inflation. Second rate is walking inflation. When inflation rate is in between of 6% to 8%, that will be known as walking inflation. In this case, inflation is walking, it means inflation is increasing, but not by too much rate. Third situation is running inflation. This situation is also known as galloping inflation. When inflation rate increases at the rate of 10% to 12%, or if inflation rate reach at two-digit level, this situation is known as running inflation. Next is hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is that situation in which inflation rate increases from 50% or 100% or 200%. When price increases by too much large amount or large ratio, that situation is called hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is very bad for the economy. This situation damage or destroy the economy's function or all the activities. So hyperinflation is very dangerous or very harmful for each and every economy. So if price increases by creeping rate or mild inflation is good for the economy. But hyperinflation is not good for the economy. Hyperinflation is always bad for all the economies, either it may be developed or developing or underdeveloped. So these are the kinds of inflation on the basis of rate of inflation. We can explain all these kinds with the help of certain range or rate of inflation. So if price rises from 2 to 3%, that is creeping inflation. If price increases from 6 to 8% in between of this range, that is walking inflation. If price increases from 10% to 12% or inflation rate is at the two-digit level, that is running inflation. And if inflation rate increases from 50% or 100% or 200%, that is hyperinflation, which is always bad for all the economies. Next is forms of inflation. Now, what is creeping inflation? You can write the definition of creeping inflation in this form. For example, the price level, if increases very slowly over a period of time, like I said that If price increases from 2% to 3% in between of this range, that is called creeping inflation. It is also known as mild inflation. So creeping inflation is that situation when price level increases very slowly over a period of time. And moderate inflation is that inflation when price rises is not by the too much fast rate and not too much slow rate. So moderate is the medium situation or medium level of inflation. This situation occurs when rise in price level is neither too fast nor too slow. That is called moderate inflation. Next is other forms of inflations are also here. First is true inflation. True inflation always exists after achieving the full employment level. So true inflation, it takes place after full employment of all factor inputs in an economy. It is a situation of full employment. The national output becomes perfectly inelastic. It means at the level of full employment, national income can't increase, national output can't increase, employment level can't increase. Then what will be increased? Only price level can increase. So if inflation occurs after achieving the full employment level, that is called true inflation or real inflation, which we can see at any time. If inflation exists only after achieving the full employment level, but this situation does not exist in the economy because full employment is a very rare situation. We can't achieve very easily, and at the level of full employment, 5% to 6% unemployment maybe exist, which is known as natural rate of unemployment according to J.M. Keynes. So here more money will lead to higher prices and not more output. In other words, we can say that true inflation only exists after achieving the full employment level. Next is semi-inflation. Semi-inflation is also known as quasi-inflation. Quasi or semi, both are same word. So semi-inflation exists when a country may experience inflation arising from bottlenecks even before full employment. If inflation exists before the full employment level, that is called semi-inflation. There may be inflationary price rise in some sectors of the economy. Like in agriculture sector, price may be increase, or in industrial sector or tertiary sector, price may be increased before the full employment level. So full employment level is a point where we can decide inflation will exist or not. If we have achieved the full employment, then definitely price level will rise. Beyond that level, nothing will rise, no income will rise, national income will not rise, output level will not rise, and full employment after achieving this level, employment level will also not rise, only price level will rise. That is called true inflation or real inflation. But semi-inflation always exists before the full employment level, not after the full employment level. And it may be inflation, it may be inflationary price rise in some sectors of the economy. It may be primary or secondary and tertiary. Next is types of inflation. We can describe the rate of types of inflation. Inflation can occur sparingly by creeping, in which price do not increase by more than 10% per year. Galloping inflation is that inflation in which price rises from 20% to 200% a year, is already a very serious stress on the economy, although the prices are not difficult to predict and include options, transactions and contracts. But galloping inflation, according to world level, if price increases from 20% to 200% a year, that is the situation of galloping inflation. And the most disastrous and harmful situation of inflation is known as hyperinflation, which is astronomical growth of currency in circulation and as a consequence a catastrophic rise in commodity prices. Hyperinflation is very bad situation for all the economies of the world. When balanced with respect to inflation, prices rise moderately or in a medium level for most goods and services. That growth is called, or that growth of price level is called moderate growth or moderate inflation. And if there is an unbalanced growth in price level, for example, if price level increasing not by the same rate or not by the same proportion, that is called unbalanced inflation. Some products price rises from by 100%, some goods price rises from 20%, some goods price rises from 50%. That is called unbalanced inflation. In case of unbalanced inflation rate for various goods and services are rising at different times and in different ways for each type of product. So we can say that inflation rate may be balanced or moderate for each and every commodity which are produced in our economy, and it may be unbalanced of the various goods and services. So these are the different types of inflation. Inflation types may be creeping or galloping, and hyperinflation or balanced and unbalanced. Next is current causes of inflation. Current causes of inflation is increase in money supply. First cause is increase in money supply. That is very important and very much too much affecting factor of inflation. Increase in money supply. In India, government always make deficit budget because in India, here population is increasing day by day. That's why government expenditure is increasing and the revenue of the government is not increases according to their expenditure. In this case, government always make deficit budget when expenditures are more than revenue. In this case, deficit budget, government give pressure to RBI to increase money supply. And to compensate this deficit budget, RBI issues more paper currency, coins, notes, etc. When to compensate this deficit budget to increase in money supply by RBI, in this case, circulation of money or flow of money will rise. And if flow of money will rise, then purchasing power of the country people will also rise. And due to rise in purchasing power of the country people, supply can't increase because resources are limited or scarce. So if demand increases but supply can't increase, in this case, only price level will increase. This situation is called inflation. So inflation, the main and first important cause is increase in money supply, which always exists in the economy when government make deficit budget. To compensate this budget, government always make deficit financing through RBI, or in this case, money supply increases and price also increases by the same ratio or simultaneously according to Irving Fisher's theory, quantity theory of money. Next is supply chain disruption. If supply can't increase due to increase in aggregate demand, if there is a lag between demand and supply or disequilibrium between demand and supply, then inflation will occur. Third point is government-sponsored unemployment. When unemployment exists, then inflation will also increase. Because if people are unemployed, they are not getting job opportunities. It means they are not giving any contribution in GDP. If they are not giving any contribution in GDP, so output can't increase. If output can't increase, then only price will increase. So unemployment is also the main cause of inflation. In India, here so many people are unemployed because population is increasing, but employment opportunities are not increasing by the same rate. That's why unemployment always exists in India. In this case, when unemployment exists and government sponsored unemployment exists in the economy, it means people are remaining idle. They are not giving any contribution in the output level. They are only demanding for goods and services but not giving contribution in productive activities. In this case, when demand is increases and supply is not increasing, then only price level will rise. Fourth point is poor government policies. Government policies are also a main responsible cause of inflation. If government is not making good policies for the economy, if government is making poor policies, like if government is spending too much, not seeing their revenues, and if government is spending money unnecessary which are not contributing in the development of the country, if government is corrupted and government is not making good policies for the economy, in that case inflation occurs. So these are the main four reasons behind the causes of inflation. First is increase in money supply. Second is supply chain disruption or disturbances between aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Third is government sponsored unemployment. And fourth is poor government policies. These are the current causes of inflation. Next is, how is inflation measured? In this case, we will talk about price index. How price level can be measured or estimated, or inflation can be estimated. Here there are two types of price index. One is producer price index and other is consumer price index. As you know that there are two types of price index. One is wholesale price index and other is retail price index. Retail price index is related with consumer and wholesale price index is related with producer. Producer price index measures the average change over time in the selling price received by domestic producers of goods and services. So if price index is related with producers of selling goods and services, that is known as producer price index or wholesale price index. Second is consumer price index. Consumer price index or retail price index measures the average change over time in the prices paid by urban consumers. It measures the average change in over time in the selling price received by the domestic producers of goods and services, but consumer price index measures average change over time in the price paid by the consumer, not received by the seller. If we are telling about selling price received by the seller, that is producer price index. But if we said that the price level which is paid by the consumer, that is related with consumer, this is known as consumer price index. So inflation can be measured with the help of two indices. One is producer price index and other is consumer price index. Next is inflation. What is inflation? So in this picture you are watching there that price, if price rising over time and if price goes up, that is called inflation, and it can be measured by CPI. CPI is consumer price index. Consumer price index. So consumer price index can be measured the inflation rate, and inflation may be good or may be bad for the economy. So there is a positive or good impact of inflation is higher paychecks. It can help the economy to grow much faster rate and helps borrowers. So these are the positive impact of inflation. Inflation sometimes good for the economy, but inflation sometimes bad for the economy. If inflation occurs at the rate of mild inflation or walking inflation, that is good for the economy. But if inflation occurs at a very higher rate or in a situation of galloping or hyperinflation, that will be bad for the economy. So it may be give good impact or bad impact. So this is inflation, which can be measured by CPI, Consumer Price Index, and Producer Price Index. If we want to compute a price index, how we can calculate or estimate? Here is an example of computing a price index. If we have given the basket price in the base year $12,000, and if the price of the current year is given $13,200, then how we can calculate consumer price index for the current year? So if nominal price divided by real price multiplied by 100, then we can calculate price index. Here current price is 13,200 and the base year price is 12,000. If 13,200 divided by 12,000 multiplied by 100, then we can calculate the CPI in the current year, which is 110. This CPI of 110 indicates that prices in the current year are increasing by 10% or by the rate of 10%, which is higher than the price in the base year. So price index in current year divided by price year in base year multiplied by 100. This is the formula of calculating price index. It is also known as GDP deflator. A GDP deflator is a price index which measures the price of the current year and the base year price. Or in other words, we can say that it's a ratio of current year price and base year price. We can write in this formula in this form also: basket prices in the current year divided by basket price in the base year. This is called price index, and this is the formula of calculating price index. The simple formula is nominal price or current year price divided by base year price or real price multiplied by 100. It is the formula of computing price index. Next is the main different cause of inflation or types of inflation are two. One is demand pull inflation and second is cost push inflation. Demand pull inflation, it is clear by its name. The inflation when price increases only due to increase in demand of the consumer. That will be called demand pull inflation. In this diagram, here aggregate supply is upward sloping curve, which is generally slopes upward, which shows positive and direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. And aggregate demand curve is always downward sloping curve, which shows the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Where AD1 curve intersects AS curve, equilibrium point is determined. At this equilibrium point, price level is this GPL is general price level is 1 and the income level is Y1. If demand increases, then demand curve will shift to the right hand side. The equilibrium point will also shift from E to E1 or E1 to E2, and at this equilibrium or new equilibrium point, here general price level will increase from GPL1 to GPL2, and the level of income will also shift from OY1 to OY2. So demand pull inflation occurs when aggregate demand grows at an unsustainable rate, leading a positive output gap. It means here actual GDP is greater than potential GDP. If actual GDP is greater than potential GDP and the gap between GDP actual and potential occurs, it will be called inflationary gap, or this inflation occurs only due to increasing aggregate demand. When there is excess demand, producers can raise their prices and thereby achieve bigger profit margins. Demand pull inflation is most likely when there is full employment of resource, when aggregate supply is inelastic, it can't change, supply cannot increase, cannot decrease, only demand can change, then demand pull inflation occurs and it will create the situation of inflationary gap. An inflationary gap is a situation when actual GDP is more than the potential GDP. So this is the demand pull inflation diagram, and we can explain this demand pull inflation with the help of AD and AS diagram. In previous session, you have studied about AD-AS model. In that session, I have discussed with you AD slope is always downward and aggregate supply slope is always upward, where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium or macroeconomic equilibrium can be achieved. So we are using this model, AD-AS model, to describe these two types of inflation, demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. This is the case of demand pull inflation. Next is demand pull inflation according to classical and Keynesian. We can explain this demand pull inflation, or we can show different types of diagram according to classical approach and according to Keynesian approach. According to classical approach, long run aggregate supply curve is always vertical, which shows at the level of full employment, output will not increase, income level will not change, employment will not change because full employment is already achieved. So LRAS curve is vertical. SRAS is showing short run aggregate supply curve, and aggregate demand curve is generally downward sloping curve, where AD intersects SRAS1 or LRAS curve. Here price level is determined P1 and income level is determined Y. Here FE is showing full employment. Because full employment level concept was introduced by classical economics, and classical said that this is a very simple phenomena and it can be achieved very easily, and at the level of full employment no one will increase output, income and employment can't increase, only price level will increase. That's why long run aggregate supply curve according to classical approach is always in vertical or parallel to the y-axis. And according to Keynes, supply curve is always upward sloping curve, or after reaching full employment it will be inelastic or vertical, but not before that. So SRAS curve is upward sloping curve, where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium price and quantities, income level is determined according to classical approach. If aggregate demand increases, then price level will also increase, income level will also increase, but price is increasing by more ratio than income. So this is the situation of demand pull inflation according to classical economics. And according to Keynes, aggregate supply will be initially in the beginning, it will be horizontal curve, or this is the situation of liquidity trap. After that, intermediate range, and after that, classical range will start. So here aggregate supply is showing three ranges. One is Keynesian range, another is intermediate range, and last is classical range, which is perfectly inelastic range. So if aggregate demand increases in a intermediate range, then price level will also increase, and this will show the situation of demand pull inflation. So this is the basic difference between classical and Keynesian approach of demand pull inflation. Next is cost push inflation. What is cost push inflation? Cost push inflation generally occurs due to increase in cost of production. As we know that factors of productions are four: land, labor, capital, entrepreneur. All these factors are known as primary factor, which give main contribution in the production of goods and services. Other factors are also very important like raw material, fuel, etc. These are known as secondary factor. If there is an increase in cost of the production, then price level will also rise because cost is related with producers. If producers using higher cost of production, they will produce less, because if cost of production increases, their profit margin will fall, and due to fall in their profit margin, they will produce less. When they will produce less, aggregate supply will fall and curve will shift to the left hand side. As well as supply decreases, supply curve will again and again shift to the left hand side. Due to the shift in left hand side of this aggregate supply curve, in that case, price will increase and output or income level will fall. So this is the main reason behind cost push inflation, increase in cost of all the producing goods. If cost of production increases, like labor cost increases, transportation cost increases, raw material cost is available at the higher price, if depreciation is increasing, and if government is imposing more taxes on producers, all these are included in cost of production. If cost of production increases, then producers' profit margin will be fall, and due to fall in their profit margins, aggregate supply will fall, they will produce less, and supply curve will shift to the left hand side. And if aggregate demand curve remains constant or downward sloping, only aggregate supply curve is shifting towards left hand side. In that case, price level will rise and quantity of the product will fall. This situation is known as cost push inflation. In this diagram, here AD is downward sloping curve, AS is upward sloping curve, where AS1 intersects AD. GPL, general price level 1, is determined, and if aggregate supply falls, curve will shift to the left hand side. AS2 is showing falling aggregate supply. This new aggregate supply or decrease in aggregate supply curve intersects AD curve. On that point, another equilibrium point will be determined. At this equilibrium point, general price level will increase from GPL1 to GPL2, and the output level will fall from Y1 to Y2. So this is the situation of cost push inflation. We can show with the help of this AD and AS diagram. Next is cost push inflation. You can show according to classical economics approach also. In this case, LRAS curve will be vertical and AD curve will be downward sloping curve. SRAS curve is generally upward sloping curve, where SRAS1, AD and LRAS all are intersecting each other. Equilibrium point A is determined. At this equilibrium point, price level will be P1 and income will be Y. Here F is showing full employment, because when full employment is achieved, LRS curve will be always vertical or parallel to the y-axis. When aggregate supply falls, then SRAS curve will shift to the left-hand side due to increase in cost of production. New equilibrium point will be B. At this equilibrium point, price level will increase from P1 to P2 and income level will fall from full employment income to Y2. So this is also the situation of cost push inflation according to classical approach. Next is causes of inflation. What are the various causes of inflation? Demand pull inflation is it is clear by its name that demand pull inflation always occur due to increase in aggregate demand and fall in aggregate supply. And cost push inflation, it is related with supply side, or when cost of production increases, then producer's profit margin will fall and supply will also falls. Due to fall in supply, price also rises. This is situation is cost push inflation. And when price rises from increasing in demand of the consumers, then it will create the situation of demand pull inflation. So these are the two diagrams of demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. In first diagram, here AD is downward sloping curve, AS is upward sloping curve, where both curve intersect each other. Initial equilibrium point is determined, P0 and Y0. Income and price is also determined. When aggregate demand increases from 80 to 81, price level will also increase and income level will also increase. But price will increase due to increase in aggregate demand. This situation is called demand pull inflation. And in another case, when cost push inflation exists, in this case, supply will fall, demand curve will remain same. When supply falls or shifts to the left-hand side, then price level will increase, income level will fall. This situation is called cost push inflation. So these are the causes of these two types of demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Next is the difference between demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. When the price level rises because of excess demand condition in the market, it will be called demand pull inflation. And when the price level rises because of increasing cost of production, this is called cost push inflation. The main reason behind demand pull inflation is rise in population, rise in income of the consumer are the main responsible factors for demand pull inflation. And the main factors which are responsible for cost push inflation is rise on the prices of the factors of production like land, labor, capital, entrepreneur, and other factors like fuel prices, if wage cost increases. These are the main causes of cost push inflation. Next is hyperinflation. What is hyperinflation? Hyperinflation is a situation when price increases at a very large rate, or 100% if price increases by 200%, 300% or 400%. This situation is known as hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is very dangerous or disastrous situation for each and every economy. In economics, hyperinflation occurs when a country experiences very high, accelerating and perceptibly unstoppable rates of inflation. Two things happens as a consequences. One is general price level of all the goods and services increases, meaning currency loses real value. When price level increases at the very too much rate or higher rate or disastrous rate, then currency value will fall and people don't have any trust on currency, because currency's purchasing power will become zero or nil. And second is the real value of economic items generally stay the same. Hyperinflation is a very bad situation, and we should always control this situation, because if this situation is not handled by the economy, then economy will be spoiled or destroyed due to hyperinflation. Here are some examples of hyperinflation like in Germany. Hyperinflation exists in during the Second World War time period, and Zimbabwe hyperinflation also destroyed the economy of Zimbabwe. Venezuela is also affected by this hyperinflation situation. So many economies suffered from these hyperinflation situation. Venezuela hyperinflation is a very recent hyperinflation when price level of the product increases by too much rate. In that case, the amount of currency which people held, their value totally decreases. Their holding currency can't purchase any types of goods and services in the economy. That is the situation of hyperinflation. So, this is the situation of hyperinflation. Next, we will continue in next session. Thank you.